Good afternoon. It's Saturday, April the 27th at year 2019, and it's 2 p.m. I'm Leon Davis, and I want to thank you for joining me. You're listening to my podcast, Altitude Adjustment. This past week, I ran across a Netflix special. It was a lecture by Brene Brown about the call to courage, or his title, Call to Courage. And I encourage you to, if you have Netflix, to watch this. It's very informative. I found it quite useful. And through the course of the week, I actually watched it twice, and it brought back to me a lesson that I had learned. There are lessons that we learn in life, and as we move through life, and you get reacquainted with it through events that happen and occur. And one of the things that I've tried to implement is that if I have an opportunity to go back, if I find something interesting or useful, to go back through it and look at it a second time. And I found that there were different, the second time through, I noticed different things that I didn't notice the first time through. And so I really do encourage you, if you have a chance to watch this special, please do. So we're going to talk about that coming up right now.
Welcome to Altitude Adjustment.
Okay. So, through the special, she talked a lot about vulnerability and how vulnerability is necessary for courage. And I found that while I understood that, I try to go through and think of all of the ways that is important, what may or may not be true as far as that statement goes. And there were as I said, there was a lot of information that she provided I thought was really excellent. And one of the first things that I wanted to talk about was she talks about people in the cheap seats. People in the cheap seats are people who criticize you, who aren't being courageous in their own life. And she says, if you're not, and this is not an exact quote, but if you're not in the arena getting your ass kicked, I'm not interested in your feedback. And I like to say that people in the cheap seats are people who criticize because they don't have any skin in the game. So they criticize without exposing themselves to criticism. And one of the recent, I know I pointed it out in my Green New Deal podcast, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saw a problem, presented what she thought might be a solution to at least start the conversation. It wasn't completely detailed, but it was, let's have a conversation around this. And these are some of the ideas that I think are going to be important for solving the problem. And so she put herself out there, not thinking, my guess is when she thought she put together the plan and put it out there, she may or may not, but I wouldn't imagine that she expected the kind of pushback that she got. But she put a plan out there thinking, I see a problem. I'm a problem solver. I try to get things done, having run and beat an incumbent, I think a 4-term incumbent, shows that somebody with determination. And so she puts her plan out there thinking, we'll start a conversation. We'll try to make some movement towards solving the problem. And there was this absolute insane behavior from the cheap seats. They talked about her shoes. They talked about her clothes. They called her childish, stupid. They talked about she needs to learn something. And absolutely none of those people, not a one of them, had put forth their own plan about solving the problem. In fact, some of them even denied that the problem existed, and yet were willing to criticize someone for putting forth a solution. So they're yelling from the cheap seats, and they have no skin in the game. So they don't have a plan out there for someone to criticize or even compare it to her plan or to show where they think she's incorrect in her attempt to find a solution. And one of the things that Brene Brown mentions is that don't take to heart those kinds of people, that kind of criticism, because if you're not willing to get in there and get your ass kicked, which I thought was absolutely beautiful, if you're not willing to venture forward and put forth and be vulnerable, then what gives you the position to criticize, to complain, to say that this was not a good plan? You have nothing to stand on to make that accusation. So vulnerability didn't come necessarily at. She wasn't feeling vulnerable when she created the plan, thinking, questioning, is this a good plan? Or, what are people going to think of it? My guess is, I see a problem, I'll put forth something, a solution, and we can begin to talk. So the vulnerability, can be my guess is because Brene Brown is a researcher, and this is the kind of work that she does. And it was interesting. She mentioned that she studies shame, and you really do have to watch the special. But so vulnerability, and she explains what vulnerability is, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to encourage you to see it, because I think having the opportunity to view it yourself and then filter it through your filters is going to be important. But for me to just kind of give you a taste of what I thought would be what I got from it. Now there's and she talked about this. I think there's a downside to vulnerability. Okay, so vulnerability provides the ability to connect with others. And there are, as I mentioned, she mentioned several things that vulnerability provides, positive things that vulnerability provides. As a man, showing vulnerability can be a double-edged sword. So I say can be because I'm hedging my bets, but it is a double-edged sword. If you are seen in the current environment of how we define gender roles, how we define expected behavior from one another, vulnerability is not considered an asset generally for men. Now, one of the things that was mentioned is that vulnerability needs to have boundaries. That means just opening yourself up for criticism in a general way is not vulnerability. But in certain situations, that vulnerability is going to build for you a better life. And I think it's important to understand the distinction of opening your life up and having people examine it and being vulnerable. Those aren't necessarily the same thing. So it's important to understand that distinction, and it's a nuanced discussion. And nuance, I think, is extremely important in any conversation, because it defines the context with which you're talking about. And it's important to be talking apples and apples and oranges and not speak apples while the other person is talking oranges. And that's a kind of a general way to describe it without getting into any specific details. But so I would encourage you to, examine that, maybe put that down, and at some point define that for yourself, and then engage someone in a conversation and compare how you see it to how they see it, and see where you stand on that. Because as a society, it is important that we work together and understand, and communication is the ability to get my idea that is floating around in my head for you to fully understand and fully know exactly what it is that I mean when I say certain words or when I put forth certain ideas. And if you don't have an idea of what your interpretation of something is, it's going to be difficult to have that conversation, because you have no point of reference for evaluating the ideas that I put forth to you. One of the things that she said was vulnerability is an accurate measure of courage. And she goes on to explain slightly what she means there. And I thought that was important. And I'm not going to go too deep into that, but I can see where that comes from, and I understand it a little bit. One of the things that she talks about during her special is that because she's done so much research and she's got all this data, and how they use that data, unfortunately, because I'm not able to see the data, I have to rely on her interpretation and how she describes that information so that I can build basically and understand what she's trying to say. One of the things that became a question for me was understanding that vulnerability is a tool, or that happens when we try to be, it's necessary to be courageous. It is necessary for courage. If you're not vulnerable, if and there were two other things that were necessary for courage to exist, but if you don't have those available, you're not being courageous. You're not showing courage. And so one of the things that I thought of, or we thought about, or wanted to examine was, what is the opportunity for a person to use vulnerability, what they think is their vulnerability, as a tool for their own motivation. In other words, I realize I care about something, or something is important to me, and I do it. I open up for around me with the intent to use any criticisms as an opportunity to better myself. So that would be one of the questions that I have, that I'm examining. Can I use that, or should I try to, or what is the potential of something of that nature? So one of my goals is to better understand vulnerability and how it plays into um, the things that I do in my life, and how other people use that, or how other people react to, or informed by, or um, um, affected by their vulnerability. Because if we're made, if we're dealing with the vulnerability, there are things that we have to do in order to continue to function well, or we won't function well at all. Now, one of the things that I found very interesting um, during her talk was, and this I found so there was, during a time period a short while ago, there's, and you hear people make jokes about it all the time, of participation trophies. Just because you participated, you get a trophy. And so one of the things that was talked about during the special was failing, but believing you have achieved success for trying. I'm not trying to say that that's not the case, because it is necessary that we have those victories, because that having that victory encourages us to continue to push forward, to push against our limits. And how do we reconcile if we're always trying and never succeeding, always giving ourselves the go ahead to believe that we have been successful and just trying. So that would be a question I would ask in an attempt to understand that better, not just to place that trying and succeeding, or trying and winning, against a participation trophy. Pardon me. So that's one of the items that I think I'm going to try to get a better understanding on. But it was just one of the questions that came into my mind as I was watching the special, and I didn't, even the second time through, I didn't feel like I got a better answer for it. And I don't expect that when you don't have an opportunity to question the speaker about their information, their data, and you're not presented with the data so that you can do your own research. One of the things that was also brought up was armoring up against vulnerability and shutting yourself from all of the positive and the negative tools that vulnerability provides you. So there are, because you're vulnerable, there is a downside to, I don't say a downside to that. There is a side of it that becomes difficult to navigate. And in trying to navigate that, it is understandable that sometimes we're going to armor up. We're going to do what it takes to assuage the anxiety, assuage the hurt that we may be feeling, to mitigate the vulnerability that we're feeling. And my guess is that armoring up is a natural occurrence. It's something that we do without necessarily thinking about it. And so we have to be self-aware enough to know when we're armoring up, when we're not getting the best out of the situation, when we're not when we're closing ourselves off from an experience that's going to better us. One of the so I'll share this event from my childhood. So I think it was seventh grade. I think it's seventh grade. So I was on the tumbling team. Most of my efforts on the tumbling team, I wasn't a great tumbler. I didn't do a lot of the tumbling. It was just mostly, a few things. I wasn't very good at tumbling, but I helped set up equipment. I helped the people that were more adept at tumbling be able to facilitate that. And we would go to different grade schools and put on tumbling shows. And so at one particular event, the kids were just really alive, just cheering and having a good time. And so I got hyped up on the hype, on the emotion that was going on. And for some reason, I decided that we used a mini trampoline. And if you're familiar with a mini trampoline, you'll see them. They use them a lot in basketball at halftime. Somebody runs, jumps, hits that mini tramp, goes up and dunks the ball. But the mini tramp, it has stretchy fabric that's suspended by springs and held by a frame. And so there is a gap between the fabric and the frame. Not having practiced a lot, not having been good at tumbling, I don't know what I was trying to accomplish. It was just one of those things you get hot, juiced up on the crowd cheering, and you think, I don't know, I'll go and do something. So I hit the run, I jump, I hit the mini tramp, and I didn't hit the mini tramp properly, and my foot went through the area around where the springs held the fabric, and so I missed one of my feet missed the fabric and went through between the fabric and the frame, and I tumbled over and I hit the ground, and the tramp went over on me, and some of the people that were with me, the teammates, they helped get me back on my feet. And one of the lessons I learned from that was that while you may put yourself out there, while you may dare to try to do something, preparation is almost essential. Just doing something because you're vulnerable. You're willing to be vulnerable. Doesn't necessarily. I learned a great, truly great life lesson, which I use to this day. And it wasn't until years later that I understood that I was able to put the lesson into words. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity. When you prepare, when you put your dedicate your life to doing something. You dedicate your time to doing something. It is to your benefit to be prepared when an opportunity comes your way. But to force an opportunity that you're not prepared for, I question about the courage, whether that's courageousness or foolishness. If I'm not prepared to fly an airplane, it is not courageous to attempt to fly an airplane. But if I am prepared to fly an airplane and the opportunity arises, maybe I haven't flown this particular type of airplane, or maybe I haven't, pardon me, maybe I haven't had a lot of hours behind a joystick. But at least I am prepared to some degree, so that if the opportunity arises, I can step forward, realizing that there are vulnerabilities that I have. I'm not going to, may not have the complete confidence that I can do this, but I am to some degree prepared and ready for that. So I will say that preparation is an essential part of courageousness versus foolishness. Failure is necessary, and that was one of the things that she mentioned. And I think anyone who knows about achieving understands that failure is necessary. Failure, recognizing where you went wrong, where you did not do what you needed to do, is an opportunity for you to better yourself. Without that, you will probably more than likely not see a reason to better yourself, to prepare yourself, to work hard at what you do. And regardless of whatever natural talents you may possess, whether you can pick up a saxophone and play notes without having formal education, practice is still going to be essential to better yourself, regardless of how your natural ability is. Whether you play sports or whatever, practice and failure, making those mistakes, having those setbacks, having opportunities where you don't succeed, and then understanding what went wrong and how you can do better next time are essential to achieving and at least presenting yourself as a candidate for other successes. One of the things I like to say, well, let me pass that. So I've talked about the definition of luck. One of the things that, so I thought about, because I am doing my podcast, and I do the video podcast, and I pull the audio out and put it up for an audio podcast. One of the things that I realize, and I don't think about it a whole lot now, but I from time to time do consider it. That video, the video and the audio is going to be out there for a long time. So when I put together a show, I do my best to try to make sure it's the best show I can put together for that instance. But one of the things that we've learned is, at least I've learned, is that regardless of what your intent, regardless of what effort you put forward into, regardless of what effort I put forward into building the best show, if the environment around me changes, and some of the ideas that I put forward are deemed to be, outside the mainstream or harmful, somewhere down the road, I will have to deal with that. If it becomes that it becomes more wide, my videos become more widespread or things of that nature. At this particular time, in this digital age, what you do online, what you do as far as recording audio and video, is going to be around for a long time. And whether you specifically suffer ramifications for things that you say and do, people who care for you and who are family may have to deal with that. And I think that that's interesting. And I think a lot of people are taking, so they're in the case, such as in the case of Ocasio-Cortez, they may not be seeing down the road. They're putting forth these videos. They're putting forth themselves on video and audio, and they're not seeing the potential for down the road if things become different, if things change, if attitudes change. So I encourage you, if you're doing any videos or if you're doing any audios, to be comfortable with, to try to be comfortable, be prepared. As I said, you have to be prepared for the opportunities, but to be prepared if things go sideways. I don't like that term. If things go sideways and they don't work out as you anticipated that they would. So I encourage you to keep trying. It's always important to give your best effort and to show up, which is another term that was used in the video, was to show up. Keep in mind that life happens for those who pursue it. So I encourage you to pursue your dreams. I encourage you to pursue opportunities to better your life, and realize that vulnerability is a part of courage and pursuing your dreams. Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. This podcast is streamed live each week right here on YouTube, and it is there to encourage you. I encourage you to participate, to ask questions, and include your thoughts. If you'd like to participate, contact Altitude Adjustment by connecting via Skype at lionsden.stl@gmail.com or Google at thelionsden.stl@gmail.com. Also, feel free to connect with me on Instagram, Pinterest, Facebook, or here on YouTube. Be sure to look for this and other episodes where you listen to podcasts. And remember, your likes and shares are internet gold. So please like and share this podcast where you find it. And remember, be cool, be calm, and above all, be careful. Look out for the other guy, because they may not be looking out for you.